Welcome to The Intentional Way, where literally every moment is a step towards purposeful living. I'm Bryan Hatch, here to explore the power of intention with you. Learn from our guests who embody intentionality. I'm glad you're here with me. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the next episode on The Intentional Way. I'm really excited today because we have one of my favorite people in the world, and I say that very sincerely, Layne Gneiting with us. He has done some really amazing things. He's a doctor. He's a PhD. He has studied many years. He's also done some incredible things that we'll get to. I don't want to just spill all the beans, but he's worked with many different companies. Golly, just one of the most amazing people that I've had the privilege of getting to know, Layne. So thank you for being here with us today. Before I ruin anything else, can you tell us a little more about yourself? Things that someone that's listening for the first time don't know who Layne Gneiting is. Who is Layne Gneiting?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Bryan, because I recently revised my bio.
Okay.
And it's simple. I'm just an average guy. Every Friday morning, I wake up in a panic when I hear the garbage truck come down the street because I forgot to roll my bin out to the curb. But twice a year, I don a super suit and I get to take doctors and executives on the most extraordinary adventure of their lives.
That is incredible. So tell us a little more about this extraordinary adventure that you take doctors and executives on. Tell us more about that.
What do you want to know?
I want to know what you're going to tell us.
It's magical. Man, Bryan, I seriously wish every single person on the planet could do it, because it is utterly amazing to be unchained from all the stranglehold of life and to be out on the open road where anything could happen. It could rain, it could snow, it could be wind. You could have the best weather alive, and you never know who you're going to meet. And that opens up all kinds of possibilities, not only for meeting and encounters, but the three things it does, if I had to boil it down to these three: it boosts your self-belief, it dramatically increases your awareness, and it reveals you to you.
I love it. I love it. So you said that they're unchained from, maybe you said typical life or daily life.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that matter? You know, we're talking about many things in attention, and why would it matter that they're unchained? Maybe it's too much of a pun because you're on a bike, but tell me a little more about why is it
I didn't
unchained?
think of that. Bryan, what's crazy is that as I talk to people, many of them feel like their life is controlled. Like they don't really have control of their life. They don't really have choice. Instead, they're doing things out of a sense of obligation, duty. I have to do this. And their language speaks it. I have to go to work. I've got to do this. And so it's deep in their psyche. It's not overt right out in front where they recognize it, but deep inside, they don't really feel like they have ownership of their lives.
So tell me, how do you pull this process that's deep inside and bring it to the awareness? You said one of the things that they get to experience on what you do is to have a better or greater sense of self or a self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm conflating or I'm mixing two of the bullet points, but either way, how do they pull it from deep inside to bring it to awareness? What is it that you do that makes that possible for them?
Well, there are two things. One, when I take people out, there's like a several month preparation phase, and that helps remove the scales from our eyes. I got a great story that I'll share. But the other thing is, when we're out on the open road, it's a lot of people who are driven. They just, boom, they're in the mode of getting out, busting out as fast as they can, get to the finish line.
Okay.
And like everything in me screams, we're the opposite of that.
Okay.
And so I put things in place like photography and journaling and stopping to make sure that it's not just a marathon.
Why? What's wrong with that? Getting to the finish line, like getting to the outcome. What's wrong, or at least why does that matter in what you do? I see that there's stopping and maybe that journey of a process, but why does that matter as opposed to letting people go to the goal that they're used to going after?
Can I tell you a story to answer?
Absolutely. I love your stories.
Okay. So as preface for people out there listening, I ended up cycling coast to coast. Took 3 months.
You ended up, I love your choice of language.
Ended up. Why? Tell me more.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing to say. I ended up, as opposed to I decided to. I ended up going coast to coast. No, it's just something to think about. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't want it
No,
to story.
this is
You
great.
ended up going coast to coast. I won't interrupt.
On one of the training rides, I went out and no, let me back up. So I'd go out and I'd feel like, oh, I've got to go out and bust out 25 miles today or 35 or whatever. And some days it was joy, some days not quite so much. And I would multitask. I'd memorize an inspiring quote, a long one that I wanted to, or rehearse a story. And it was like the heavens. You can say God, the universe, whatever you want to say, but it was like God said, Layne, I want you to notice patterns. Like, what's that going to do? Just trust me. I want you to start noticing patterns. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's going to disrupt my rhythm. I know. Just notice patterns. Oh, maybe. So I went out like this next day, and that little thought came again, Layne, notice patterns today. I headed down a road that I'd been down 100 times, and I thought, I'm not going to see anything new. And Bryan, it was like somebody had removed the onion scales right down to the core of my eyes, and I could finally see, I saw things that in the 100 times going past, I'd missed. So in answer to the question, why do it? Because so many of us are so bent on hitting the finish line that we miss the journey. With our kids, with our spouses, with our work, we're trying to get the next project. And so we're missing the joy of the struggle and the excitement of puzzling it out.
Yeah, I find that a lot of people talk about like the joy in the journey or life isn't the destination, it's the journey, right? And I've heard that for so long. And it sounds like you've created a little bit of a process to help make that be. It's one of those things like until you internalize it, it's just a theory. It's just something that's nice to say as
Mhm.
opposed to something to do. Now, what is it about patterns though? Like, why did I get that was maybe an answer to you specifically, but what did paying attention to the patterns do for you?
It required me to see differently.
Okay.
We get into our mechanized mode of living, and the brain automatically pushes things aside so that it can be efficient. And that's both good and detrimental because we push aside some things that perhaps we should become a little more, not should, but if we became more aware of them, we would feel a richness and a joy about the journey that we're missing.
Hmm. That's awesome. So you did that by going coast to coast is where you would you say that's the inception? You were on a bike prior to that. This wasn't the first time on a bike. Um,
No.
so biking has been a part of your life for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do this coast to coast thing, and one of the things that you get to slow you down instead of focusing on the end and focusing more on the journey is to look at patterns. What else did you learn on that big
Oh,
journey?
like what else? Oh my gosh. Bryan, it's like living two lives. The first life was up to that point. The second one was past that point. It revolutionized life for me. It was tougher, it was richer, it was better, it was more succulent than anything I could have fathomed up to that point.
Hmm. And it was because of the experience that opened your eye.
There are so many. It's like I just had so much to learn. There, I had so many roadblocks, and just one by one, they peeled back. Like, for instance, I wasn't very trustful of people.
Hmm.
I didn't think that people would really have your back. And then all along that journey, people in my faith and out of my faith, like total strangers, brought us in for an entire weekend, my wife and me and our 7 kids, to spend 4th of July weekend with strangers
Yeah.
as though we're family.
Hmm.
And my last 2 weeks, so Bryan, what was crazy is we got to the border of New York and Vermont. Everyone's in an old motorhome. I'm on my bike, and they had to get back to get kids in school. So the last 2 weeks were solo.
Mm-hmm. No support, zero support.
Zero support.
Okay.
Zero support from them, but it's like that's another tangent, but
Okay.
it's like the heavens have your support. It's like the universe supports you. And so 2 weeks, every single night I was in somebody's home or somebody's yard. Like, that's just flabbergasting to me, at least the me previously. There's no way that would happen.
Yeah. So throughout this, you had multiple experiences that gave you paradigm shifts, that like shifted your beliefs, shifted the things that made you who you were to that point in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave you this new perspective, this new paradigm to live inside of. Has it been challenging to continue to let go of things that were in the past, or was yesterday and then there was tomorrow? Like there's no going back.
I'd say a mixture of both.
Okay.
Like, there are parts that the walls crumble down. They're never going to erect again. They're
Okay.
done. They're
Yeah.
gone. And then others, there are lingering stories that we still got to scrape the inner side of our skulls and get rid of.
Yeah. So the way I like to look at that, Layne, is that there's like the default path that we're on, like we're walking it or riding it or driving it, whatever it is, it's the path we're on, it's default. And then there's a one that's intentional. There's one. Now, you've had paradigms and we all have experience in our lives that like push us to look at a different way, but it's like, it's almost definite this is where we're headed. And everybody's on a little bit of different path, whatever, but we're definite on this. Whereas there is another way to look at things and see things. And a lot of the time it's letting go of things that we were thinking and beliefs that we did have. And what I'm gleaning from what you said is that this journey allowed that to happen for you.
Big time.
How else would you say that you haven't already said?
Things were possible. I had extremely limiting beliefs. And that showed that anything's possible if, to go back to what you said, if you think about it differently. And if you look at it from a different lens or through a different lens or from a different angle. So after that, a new dream emerged, which was, well, why not cycle every country in the world? And immediately crashing down upon me were all the thoughts of how much money and time and effort that's going to take to do, like going into Afghanistan and North Korea and China and Russia and islands, itty bitty islands out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, little dots that only see an airplane every 4 days. Like, how are you going to do that? But it's all possible if you think about it differently.
Yeah. So have you gone into some of those countries that you've mentioned just now?
Oh my gosh.
Or you're still working on it?
Well, I'm working on some of those. Haven't been to Afghanistan, North Korea, but Bryan, I have been to places that I dreamt of as a kid that never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd ever get there. Like India or the Solomon Islands.
I don't even know where the Solomon Islands are.
Exactly. I'd never heard of them. Vanuatu, an island out there in the middle of, I guess not in the middle of nowhere, but out there in that same general area. Czech Republic, Ukraine, Moldova. I'd never heard of Moldova. Went to Moldova, right below Ukraine.
Mhm. And this all came, so tell us, maybe fill us in on a little bit of the context here. So you did coast to coast, and now it's years later that you and I are talking, but give us a little bit of like in between what you had experience, you became more self-aware, you saw things differently, paradigms were shifted. Where did you go from there? You visited all these countries, or at least a bunch of these, and you're still working on some others. Tell us a little more about that path. How did you get there?
Sure. So I'll forgive like the spiritual or religious connotations here, but I got really tight with the heavens leading up to and during that coast to coast adventure. And afterwards, just reverberating in my mind was this message: Layne, you need to write a book or write, well, what do you want me to write? Silence. Well, I got to know what to write. And I was so still scared of putting myself out there in that way and getting ridiculed that I finally threw my hands in the air and said, look, I'm not going to write. Okay. Forget it. So instead, what else? And I was guided through this process where you write all your dreams down, every single one.
Okay.
Okay. Let me ask you, from childhood, what were some of your dreams?
Oh man, I wanted to be a basketball player. And
Okay.
so that was a dream. People would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be 6 foot. I wanted to be a basketball player. I remember wanting to be on top of mountains for sure.
Huh.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I always found it fascinating to be up on top of mountains.
Did you have specific mountains?
Well, Everest is the big one. Kilimanjaro was definitely, as I was a teenager, I was like, definitely got to climb Kilimanjaro. Definitely got to do that.
Have you done that?
No, I've not done that
Yet.
yet. Correct.
Okay.
So some like that, and I've got other ones perspective now as I'm older of what other mountains there are that I didn't know of.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But that dream of being somewhere where that very few people go.
Huh.
Yeah.
So imagine getting 3x5 cards and writing one dream on each one.
Okay.
So not like mountains, but Kilimanjaro on one.
Yeah.
And Denali on another, and
Yeah.
own a Corvette on another. And so that's what I did. I wrote every single one until they were all poured out of my brain onto these cards. And the instruction came, pick them up 2 at a time, one in each hand. Choose which one you'd keep and which one you'd let go of. And some of them were easy. Like, oh yeah, forget that easily. I'd rather have a Corvette.
Okay.
But then when it came to, would you rather have a Corvette or would you rather go to India? And Bryan, suddenly you dig deep into your core values in a way you never had before. And you go, why do I want a Corvette? And I realized, so big whoop, you go fast. But to see India, to experience the magic of that wild and strange culture, hands down, like that trumps it, no contest, once you interrogated it. Well, I went through it and I had a stack of discards and then a stack of keepers. And I went through those again and again until they got down to 3. And when I looked at those 3, the 3 that were written, like I shook visibly. I couldn't believe because it just seemed so unfathomable that somebody could do that. And the one that really stroked my heart the most with its velvet touch was cycle every country in the world and make your living that way. Every country in the world. So that means you go to the UN definition, there are 197.
Okay.
So that's what led to it.
Can I ask you the count that you're at right now?
Yeah, 49.
49. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you've been doing this. Okay, so now since the coast to coast, you had this experience. I want to ask a couple questions more about that, and now you've done 49 countries.
Mhm.
And what's the time frame from there?
Started in 2012.
2012.
Coast to Coast was 2009. Did my first major adventure. Like we could talk about that, but 2 months solo from the castles of Lisbon, Portugal to the ruins of Rome, Italy for 2 months alone. And then that's what triggered everything off.
And that's how you started to make this into your full-time gig.
Yeah. Well, back then I didn't even think that I could get clients. I figured that everybody else knew this and it was just me in the dark. And I'm finally cluing into what everybody else knows,
Which was what?
that there's more to life, that there's freedom available, that anything's possible. And what I discovered when I took Halliday joined me in Norway, that was the next one, 2014. And here's this executive. I mean, I had him on a pedestal.
Great man. Great man.
He's a phenomenal man. And he came back raving about the knee buckling changes. That's when I started to scratch going, oh, okay, there's something here that could be a value for more people.
Yeah. It's interesting. Him as a case study is fascinating because I know little of him today, be different than you, but to see the things that I see way outside of his like friends group, and it seems like he's doing very purposeful things comparative to what he was doing, even though what he was doing was he was a great executive, worked hard, made some cool things happen. But that's really fascinating. So maybe you've found a way to help other people shift those paradigms in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. I love that that's what you're up to, Layne. What a fascinating line of work to be in. What do people say most often when they go, again, we're talking today about the intention and what I've seen you do. I got to get back to the questions that came up while you were speaking. I was like, oh, there's so many good questions. So first, what would have you do that activity? What got you into the activity of that seems like a fascinating thing to look at all of your dreams and then compare them and then pare them down to the top three. That seems very thoughtful. Where did that, not who brought that to you, but why were you even thinking about doing it?
Because the coast to coast was so all encompassing. Bryan, when you dive into a project, I know you are full in. And I wasn't always full in. But with that, you better believe it. So afterwards, I felt like I was adrift. What's next? What's next? I need something to really sink my teeth into and wrap myself in. And that's when I rebuffed all those impressions to write. I am writing now. And that's when it unfolded. Here's what to do. And it was just amazing. I've mentioned it to people, Bryan. Very few people have taken me up on that process that I know. And yet, I tell you, if you did it, many of the dreams you thought you had, they'd go to the wayside.
No, I'm in. I'm going to do this. Like, no way. I can't hear what you've said and not do that. I hope that listeners are doing the same thing, saying, wow, that's a great thing to do. It doesn't seem complicated, doesn't seem overwhelming, but it seems impactful at minimum and clarity driven for sure.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe, follow, and download our episode. Your support allows us to bring more intentional guests just like this, and it means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the episode. So tell me a little more about how you've become self-aware, or helping the people that go on these treks with you, how they become aware. Like you say that you have to become aware, but is that true?
So you don't have to become aware, but when you become more aware, then things shift in your life. So there are a couple of ways that we go about it. One is photography. We're in this selfie generation, selfie society.
Yeah.
Hey, look at me with this cool pyramid in the background. Everyone's going to rave and think, oh, wow, I want his life. It's not that. Instead, there are some very specific, simple, but specific exercises. Like one of the days, it's take photos of things you don't normally take photos of. And so then instead of the big grandiose shots or the tapestry of flowers blooming in the countryside, it's the garbage. Or, wow, I never take pictures of my bike.
Hmm.
And that requires them to start now paying attention to the bike or paying attention to the garbage and noticing, wow, Slovenia is so clean, there's no garbage. Which you don't think about before.
Yeah. So you have, sounds like, so you have these practices that give people the ability or the opportunity to become aware, so long as they choose to,
Mhm.
right? And so that's part of your process. You've created processes in different ways that help people become aware and noticing they didn't notice the patterns with the intent of what?
With the intent of losing the blinders and start paying attention to the moment. If we have to translate it into human terms, there's a fabulous story that asks 3 questions. What is the most important task? When is the most important time? Who is the most important person? And they get the answers to that and discover it through the journey.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, Layne.
You had some other questions.
I always do, Layne. I always have other questions. I think if we're staying in this mode, like it's presence, a lot of people talk about presence, right? And I think that would capsulate a little more of awareness. Why is that raved about so much? Why is being present so, I don't know, such a fad right now? Such a be present. That's what I keep hearing from your personal development gurus, your spiritual gurus. Like why does that matter so much?
Why do you think?
Because you can't be anywhere else than here. Well, sorry, that's actually inaccurate. There's no other place you can be powerful than right here. Like you can think about other places. You can be on your phone and looking at other people's lives, other people's pictures of the pyramids. You could be fantasizing about it, but there's no other powerful place to be than right here. Ever. That's how I would answer it. But this isn't for me. This is you.
No, this is a conversation. I love that. I think the only thing I would add to that is there really is like a 3-stage process that you can't be aware unless you observe, and you can't reach discernment unless you're aware. So you observe to become aware so that you can cultivate discernment. Otherwise, you're with people and you've got your agenda, which is great, but you doggedly go through and plow through the forces that are around you instead of working with them, intuitively discerning that, hey, there are other things going on here, and allowing them to thread into what you're up to instead of pushing it aside.
See, I think that's harder done than said. And I think even the way you described it, there's still like maybe a little complexity in it. But like, how do I even complete the question in my head, Layne? How could someone do that? Like what you just described, like, how do you actually do that? Because being present, wanting to be here is useful. I don't know, Layne. I'm like trying to find the words in my head.
Yeah. Well, talk
Well,
through it.
Give me riff on it one more time. Help me understand what you just said even better, because what you said, I didn't quite grasp maybe.
Okay. I'll put it this way. There's a fascinating book called, have you read Zen and the Art of Archery?
You've told me about
I
it.
know,
and
I told
I have not yet, but I looked it up somewhere. But yes. I did. I actually listened to a review of it. I have not read the book. I
Yeah,
need
don't get the audio version.
Okay.
Ugh.
Okay.
Yeah, it's goofy. Get the hard cover, soft bound, and just immerse in it, because that tells why. And it's this. The context is this German professor goes to Japan. He's curious about this mystical thing called Zen. Finally persuades a Zen master to teach him. And Zen master is really loath to take on a Westerner because they have certain mindsets. They're not open the way he wants them to be open. He tells them, look, it doesn't matter what art you choose, but you learn best through an art. So choose one. The guy says, well, archery. Yeah, sure. If that's on the table, I'll do that. And this thin little 80-page book chronicles a 6 or 7 year process where he learns to, as the Zen master tells him, draw the bow spiritually, which means you are not the one drawing the bow. You are not the one releasing the bow. You are not the one hitting the target. You're not even the one trying to hit the target. You are simply in the flow to allow something more divine, something more beyond you to flow through you. And that's really what it is. We get so controlling and so self-important that we think, I've got to hit the goal. I've got to nail it. I've got to draw the bow. And as soon as we release that and realize there's something infinitely more powerful than you or I flowing through us, we just ride the waves and accomplish things that are extraordinary.
That's why I'm thinking there's a little bit of I mean, obviously there's a challenge to what you just said. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a book written about it, or we'd be talking about it. But when we want to control our path, we want to have input, want to make the outcome happen as opposed to living in the journey. Maybe that's just one of the faults of our society as a Westerners, is just we're always trying to get to the next target. We're always trying to get to the next bullet point on our goal list, on whatever it is, that the journey becomes a stress. The journey becomes, well, this is just a waste of time because I'm trying to get there. Or,
oh, bing. Yes. I love how you speak. Bryan, you're able to encapsulate ideas so beautifully.
well, and that's what I'm saying is that's a challenge. That's a challenge because of a mindset that is goal oriented, people that are up to things. I'm imagining just what you said as far as like doctors and executives, like these aren't the people you're working with aren't just barely making it by. Like they've figured out something that works and they're leading or they're changing world, whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm betting, I'm doing some assuming, which isn't a useful thing to do in most cases, but for sake of conversation, I'm betting that they're used to going after the goal and finding a way to hit the goal
Mm-hmm.
at the expense of the journey.
Yes.
I'm not saying everybody that's making a goal or hitting a goal is like oblivious and being mean or crazy, but like you said, we're so focused on that goal that that arch between the 2 points is like the wasted space. Once the goal is realized, then I can enjoy my life. Then I can experience happiness and fulfillment.
Yes. Plus, as you so aptly pointed out, there are two different ways of living, at least two. And
I don't think there are more than two, honestly.
well, let me,
When we're talking about that subject, I don't know if there's any other way to define it, but I'm wrong.
well, here's an interesting thing about goals. Okay.
Okay.
The definition of a goal, and this is going to tweak your mind. It's the state of affairs that a plan is intended to achieve, and that when achieved, terminates behavior used to achieve it.
Mm.
In other words, hitting a goal is a reason to quit. And as the Zen master was trying to show the author, it's not about hitting the goal and quitting. It's about being so that, of course, you're going to hit the goal. Not because you're trying to hit the goal, but because your being is so natural that hitting the goal is inevitable.
That's why I think that goals are here and intentions are here. That's how I think about it. I could go into a huge diatribe on just that subject, but I think the way you put that, I've never looked at it that way. You said it would blow my mind, and it has, even though I love when definitions blow my mind because I could have looked it up like a million times. It didn't have to blow my mind, but the means or the activities that got you there are terminated. That's significant to me and just reinforces my belief in that intentions are superior to goals. I'm not saying that goals are bad.
Right.
I still think either of those is better than none.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. But that's so good to hear, Layne, because on the intention route, it's how you're experiencing, how I'm experiencing things that accomplishes the goal. It can't, or comes to attention, if the outcome I want to have ruins our relationship and I want to have a relationship with you, then the goal hasn't been, the intention has been reached. The goal is reached, but not the intention of being there, because otherwise it's empty.
Agreed. There's a fun little analogy that I've used from time to time. Carnegie Hall, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the big famous concert hall. If
Yeah.
you play at Carnegie Hall,
You've made it.
like you made it.
Yeah.
Well, somebody could say, I want to perform at Carnegie Hall, splurge a hefty sum of cash to rent out the space, invite all their friends, and they could play at Carnegie Hall and say forever after, I played at Carnegie Hall. But you cheated. Versus, I want to be such an accomplished pianist that I am invited to play at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah. So the way you are, who you are being, naturally has Carnegie Hall as, at minimum, a stop along the way.
Yeah.
At minimum.
Yeah.
Because of who you're being. And this is all possible on your treks. This is the groundbreaking work that you're doing that then gives people the opportunity.
Yes.
To be aware.
Yes.
To be intentional.
If they choose. And straight up, Bryan, I've got clients that they go, well, that was a great trip. And I feel like I failed them because I try to impress on them a lot of the things we do. They're going to seem simple and mundane, and you're going to want to brush them aside like they don't matter. But it's the little things that together create this marvelous tapestry of not even change, but an awareness, a becoming. And it doesn't happen unless you thread those in. My job is to help you, but ultimately it's up to you whether or not you take it.
Yeah. Anybody that's a creator, like what you've done, but in any realm of life, in my opinion, if you have people at the heart of what you're doing, you cannot guarantee that they're going to get what you intend, because they have agency. They can choose to pay attention to the instructions you gave them or not. I will say that there is a way to enhance it. There's a way to make it so that it's so clear that if they choose not to, it is because they have broken your request or changed or not sunk into what you asked them to do, but still, ultimately, no one can be responsible for somebody else's actions completely. Never, regardless if they're family, friend, executive, team member, because we always have the ability to choose. And I'm saying that even independent, maybe this outs me a little bit in my Western thinking, but even if you're in a place where the society around you says you can't think that.
Oh, especially so.
You have the ability.
Yeah.
To choose.
Yep.
so many books. Viktor Frankl's book is a keen representation of, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion,
Mm-hmm.
horrific circumstances. So, Layne, tell us about your book. Tell us about your book that you've got in the works. I'm excited to hear about that. We've had some fascinating conversation. What are you up to with your book? Tell me a little more about that.
Thanks for asking, Brian. So a lot of these stories are embedded in there, along with other stories of events that happened on the treks. Not just to me, but several of my clients, they've written, they've said, here's what happened to me. Here's where I was before. Here's what I'm doing now afterwards. Here's the pivotal change. And it really is about dreams and what I would call inspired adventures. I think another way of saying it is intentional adventures. Knowing that it's going to be tough, knowing that it's going to buckle my knees and nearly break my back, knowing all that and saying, I choose it anyway. So I think you're going to love that.
That's cool. I think that's critical part of any path is to know that challenges are coming and being committed to staying on the journey, staying on the path, as opposed to ditching it just because it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's because through the pain that we experience and the challenge that we experience, that paradigms can shift, that ideas and beliefs can be altered into what is more important or more appropriate or more powerful at minimum.
Yeah. And few of us will openly admit that we want that because our paradigms are our paradigms. We've lived with them. We own them.
Sometimes we don't even know we have them.
What's that?
Sometimes we don't even know we have them.
Exactly. We don't. We don't know we have them. And we all think we're pretty good, which isn't bad. That's not a flaw. It's not a fault. It's just not our fullest expression. So I love what you said.
Fascinating. Well, Layne, what else should our listeners hear from you that they haven't yet? What other thing? No, let me not go past this. When is your book coming out? When do people get to?
So I don't have a target date yet.
Okay.
Right now, I've got a lot of it written. I submitted my first draft to the guy who challenged me to do it.
That's awesome.
And to a number of readers saying, hey, give me feedback, what works, what's not working for you, help it level up. And I'm finding that more writing keeps adding to it, but it'll be this year.
Okay. All right. So you heard it first right here that Layne Gneiting will have a book coming out in 2024. That's fascinating. Very cool. So now I'll go to the other question. What else should people know, or what other things should we say before we conclude our conversation today? We will have many other conversations, but what else should be known or should be said?
If there's one burning question we should ask, it's, am I living the story I want to live? Am I living the story I want my life to tell? Because ultimately, it's all going to come down to one overarching story. And are you living that? And that, I believe, that is directly coupled with dreams. And so if there's one thing that, I guess the second thing, but really is the one thing, it's know what your dream is. Not dreams plural, not dream with the lowercase d, but dream with a capital D. Like the dream that is partly, you don't create it, it's awakened within you. And you choose with everything you got to pursue it. I think most of the crimes and atrocities in our world would fly to the wayside if that were to happen.
I think that it's beaten out of us a little bit. Maybe just the challenge of life or having too many failures or having, and I say too many failures purposefully, even though that's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
We have to fail in order to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But after we get so much feedback in our life of, yeah, it ain't going to happen. So how do people get to that point? How do people get to because a dream and a wish, not the same thing in my
No,
opinion.
not at all.
And so I think that most dreams occur for people as wishes. And my question to you is, how do we get back to that point? Because as kids, dreams were options, real viable options, not like a wishy maybe, but oh, dude, I could totally do that,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how outlandish it was.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get back there?
You go on a bike ride. Seriously, when you do that, all the social strangleholds fall away, or you go on a massive hike, or something that strips away all those nagging claws that have dug their talons into us, so that we can get clarity, so that we can be responsive to our inner voice, to the voice of the divine, in ways that don't get immediately pounced on because we're in the thick of society.
So what I'm hearing you say is the premise is to get to that dreamlike state, or at least be able to have dreams become an aim and something I'm working towards consistently. It is useful, if not required, that we pull ourselves out of what our normal situation is.
Mm-hmm.
We do something adventurous that has some thrill of failure and danger, maybe. And then in addition to that, then we're looking at something that is physically challenging. So it pulls you out of comfort. Like, it has to be a little challenging, because you said it could be any of those physical activities. And then that puts you in a place where possibility is possible. Like, something can come of that.
Yes.
As opposed to, I can walk around my neighborhood, I could do 10 push-ups, I could do something simple, but those experiences, not bad, won't create that opportunity to connect with the dream.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It's like your garden. You've got to create the soil for the flower to grow. If you don't prepare the soil right, you can plant the seed, but it doesn't mean the flower is going to grow. And so what you just described is the equivalent of preparing the soil so it will accept the seed and it'll grow strong and clear.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that people that are listening can find a way to get to you, and how they can also experience an adventure, right? You want to explain anything about that? How can they experience an adventure with you, Layne, or with this premise that we've talked about?
Well, you already talked about it. I love that you introduced that. But you and me, we are creating the inspired adventure movement. And I'm going to flip it back. Do you want to say more about it?
In order to do what we've talked about, what Layne has talked about today, I think it's critical that you have some help, because sometimes it's hard to get outside of ourselves. But if you already, after listening to me and Layne right now, you want to get out and just go do something adventurous that's challenging, that's going to awaken you and give you an opportunity to connect with who you are, become self-aware, and that dream state that we're talking about, dreaming, but have dreams that are connected to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want help, then I'll make sure that in the notes of this show here, you'll be able to find in the description anything that would help you go do that. We've put together a program that allows people to get out there, have some support, and start that journey. And obviously there's other ways that you can connect with Layne as well, on the bike treks, on the things that happen out there as well. Got some really cool plans coming up that I think that you'll want to check out. Layne's website, it's wayofthehero.com. Got to check that out. And yeah, that's what I would say of it. What else should I say?
Agree. I agree. I love what we've created as far as a framework to help people really wrap their minds and hearts around it, so that they have some practical steps to take. And then I would just add, as far as the cycling adventures coming up, is it okay if
Yeah.
We're going from Boston to Maine in June, going to Morocco in October, going to Patagonia next March, so 2025. And then for everybody who has done any sort of a trek with us, they're eligible to come on our reunion trek, which is going to be outstanding. And that is going to what's been called the most beautiful village in the world, in Norway. We'll go through the Lofoten Islands. And then afterwards, for the people who are really insane and want to keep going, we're going to go another week and go all the way to the northern tip of Europe in Nordkapp, Norway.
That's awesome.
It's awesome.
Well, Layne, it's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you for sharing your time and energy and talents with us. I look forward to hearing the feedback from those that listen. And today is another episode on The Intentional Way.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you for joining us on The Intentional Way. I'm Bryan Hatch, and it's been a true privilege to share this time with you. If today's episode has inspired you in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe, follow, and download our episodes. Your support not only helps us grow, it also enables us to bring more insightful conversations and exceptional guests right to you. Living intentionally begins with a single step, yours. So let's make the most of it. Until next time, seek intention by being completely present.